Hi everyone, thank you for joining today. I am Brittany Tibbin, Account Director here at Spindustry. Today's webinar is, are you in a complicated relationship with your data? Spindustry has been in the SharePoint world since 2007, and if you've met us before, you know we are very passionate about these topics and we love bringing helpful information to all of our clients. We've been able to do 10 webinars this year, and we have a lot of great topics coming in the new year, so stay tuned. If you have any questions today, please use the webinar question feature and we will try to get these answered at the end. And otherwise, you're always welcome to contact me with any questions that you have. My information will be at the end of the webinar. You'll be receiving an email with the recorded webinar and the slide deck shortly. Your host today is Jared Edge, Director of SharePoint Services at Spindustry. And we have two special guests today. Zach Eisenhower, Technical Solution Engineer from Spindustry, and Steen Jacobson, CTO from No Code Solutions. And without further ado, I'll let your host, Jared, go ahead and get started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're super excited about this particular webinar because this is an issue for almost every single client that we have. Everyone needs some type of migration. But the thing that we discovered as we were going through and talking about this with every client is migration doesn't really mean the same thing today as it meant years ago. That word is we need a new word for migration, we really do. Because when you say the word migration, people think, oh, I'm just lifting up this set of documents from one place and moving it to another place, but it doesn't really mean that anymore. It means so much more. So one of the things we wanted to do with this webinar is really to have a conversation around what does migration mean today? What are all the different types of migration? So without going through the rest of the agenda, what I want to do first is I'm going to go and just kick off a migration that we have sitting here ready to go. And what's going to happen here is at the end, we're going to come in and show you the results of this so we can kind of talk more about what happened in this scenario and what are some other scenarios as we go through. And so let me just go ahead and show you a couple of different things so that you don't think we have any tricks up our sleeve. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show you our SharePoint site, which is where the location that all this information is going to end up in at some point in time. And we're going to generate some document sets, but don't worry about what we're going to do. We'll describe it all at the end of the webinar. But I wanted to show you just one other piece. There's a piece over here, a separate document that has some metadata inside of it. So that's metadata that's going to need to end up with certain documents or around certain document sets and such. So we'll explain that again later. And then for this particular migration, we are using a product called Fusion, and Steen is the CTO of Fusion, and we'll talk more about him in just a second. But I'm just going to kick it off, okay? And then it's going to do its job in the background, and we're going to go ahead and have a nice, beautiful discussion about migration, what it is today, and then we'll come back at the end and kind of take a look at this, kind of take it out of the oven, if you will, and have it ready to go. So I'm going to hit the blue button. Awesome. Do I need to hit any of these, Zach?
No, you're good.
Okay, awesome, cool. Okay, great. So let's go back over to our presentation. Boom, talk about the rest of this agenda. Okay, awesome. So we're gonna have this nice discussion about what migration means today and to hopefully give you stretch everyone's mind here today. And then during that discussion or after that discussion, we're gonna go through multiple scenarios that we've seen with our clients on maintaining data, maintaining documents, so that's a little bit different. Okay, making sure that your data has good metadata around it. That's super, super important for everyone because you want searchability, you want all these other things that SharePoint can help you with. And then also managing data in multiple locations, which is today's world. I mean, that is what we're doing today. We have a lot of our clients, not most of them, but a lot of our clients have multiple locations. They're either plants, they're either a clearinghouse for a kind of company that has multiple companies spread around the world. There's stuff all over the place. How do we handle that in today's digital workplace? And that's some important stuff. So, and I'm gonna just add a couple other things on there real quick as well, because I like to talk, right? So, so I mean, I just got back from Ignite, and I just wanna also throw in the mix here that today's world and tomorrow's world are also different. So today's world, yesterday we were doing one thing, today we're doing something different, and tomorrow we're looking at machine learning, we're looking at AI, we're looking at all these beautiful new things, these new concepts that are coming out, and all of this plays into what we're gonna talk about today, which is migration. So All right, having said that, let's kind of kick off this discussion. What is migration? And we have this concept here we've been playing with for a couple of days, which is it's not a one-time thing, and that's so true. Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah. So like you said, migration is not a one-time thing anymore, and you know, to really understand what a migration is, we have to kind of change the outlook we have on migrations and start looking at migration through the lens of modern business. And in doing so, we need to start defining a migration as moving data from one state to another. And that could be moving locations, it could be adding metadata to it or changing the metadata associated with it. So it's a lot more complex than just picking up what you have and putting it somewhere else. And you know,
so I like that, moving it from one state to another state. So like we're moving it from Florida to like Alabama, that is data migration.
That is data migration, though that does fall into the traditional migration strategy of point A to point B, right? So by state, we mean, you know, the state of the data in that, you know, the metadata associated with it, the version of that data, everything that surrounds that data and gives that data context. If you change any of that, that is still a migration. And because of that, when we start defining migration like that, migration starts to mean business process. It starts to mean, you know, making changes to your data and the way you do business.
Yeah.
And since data changes so rapidly today, because businesses change so rapidly today, whether it's through a merger or a purchase or even reorganization or possibly even just a new process that they put in place, all of those things demand that your data changes as well. And so all of that requires a migration. So when you're considering, you know, a migration in your environment, you should stop considering it as a one-time thing and instead start considering how should my data change over time to match our business.
I like that. I like that a lot. And so I mean, in those words that you just said, you're also talking about transforming the data,
right?
You know, which is another part of migration, really. I mean, I think back in the past, we would have considered that data transformation services or ETL, you know, extract, transform, and load, all those things. But really, that's just part of what migration actually is today. It's more common than it's ever been in our entire history. Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Steen. But Steen, before you start talking about the migration piece, I'd really like you to just tell us, you know, who you are. Tell us a little bit about the company that you have here, which we at Spindustry absolutely love. And then also, you know, tell us anything else you want to tell us, but then jump back into our conversation.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Steen Jacobsen. I am CTO of No Code Solution. And we do this wonderful tool named Fusion, which helps you do all the things that Zach and Jared just outlined.
So where do you live?
I live in Copenhagen. We are based in Copenhagen. We do have an office in the US, but I am personally based in Copenhagen.
Yeah, I was listening to your accent. I thought he's not from the United States.
No, he's not. He's not. He can get away with saying really rude things.
So what is migration? You know, and from a third-party builder or from a company that has a tool that's all about moving information from one state to another state, tell me what your vision of what migration is today and what you're seeing as you have companies that are customers that are global.
Yes, that's true. I think Zach Hughes actually nailed it pretty well. But the core thing is that migration in the traditional sense 10 years ago, 15 years ago was more like forklifting. You know, you're lifting up a box of nails and screws and you're driving it over and you're dumping it somewhere else. And that somewhere else in 2019 is in the cloud. Well, basically all you get is a file share or whatever that is moved to the cloud and you can switch off your file share, nothing else. So migration is much more than that. You need to reorganize the data to match the business that you have today. You need to apply metadata. You need to use the best practices that different vendors, especially Spindustry, preaches to make value of your data. I heard this phrase this morning saying, so that you're not working for the data, but the data is working for you.
Yep.
And that's exactly the point.
I love that. So I mean that's huge. And so what you both are talking about here is many forms. And I feel like some of the people who may be listening, and especially some of our clients as we go to them and start talking about this, as we start mentioning it, they see more out of what it's supposed to be. And traditionally, when they've been talking about migration, they have been looking for, let me find a tool that can move this data from one place to the other place, and that's it. But really what they should be considering, and what we've been able to change and enlighten people about, is no, it's not just that move, it is that move, but what's coming next, and then what's coming next after that, and what's coming next after that. I mean, it is possible, and I know that all of you have seen this before. You're driving down the street, you see a bank, right? And it's called Bank A, and then you drive down the street a week later, and that same bank is now called Bank B, and then at the time it becomes Bank B, they already know they're being purchased again, so there's a Bank C sitting there behind. So they don't even put real signs up, they just put plastic wrap around the signs now to put their names on it.
Yeah, I was raising my hand because that's a really, really good point, Jared. Now that this bank become A, B, and C, you might need an extra column in that document library or that list specifying, is this Bank A or Bank B or Bank C record?
Yeah.
Right? That's a huge challenge. It sounds so really basic, right? But it isn't. And that's what Fusion also does. And that's also part of the migration concept, so to speak, to make that happen.
So truly though, maybe it's not that you have a company that's being purchased, maybe you're a solid company and you've been there for several years. But even within an organization, it is this department used to be called such and such. And then we moved that VP of this under this VP of that. And now those two departments have merged. And that happens to every organization we've ever seen. And what do we want to preserve the nature of that historical document? When it was created, it was actually a document from Department A, not a document from Department B. So how do you gauge some of those things? How do you keep that historical value of it, not just through versioning, but through the metadata that's there as well? How do you maintain some of those things? And then if I have to migrate it, because let's say you're just using SharePoint, because that's the core of our business is SharePoint. Let's say you're using SharePoint and you've set up all these site collections, and now you decide 6 months down the road, the structure of these site collections is not really what I needed. I need this in a different format. I need this in a different way. That is data migration. That's moving information from one place to another place, and then also trying to preserve as much as the original context of those documents as possible.
Right, and I mean, you're hitting all the nails on the head there, Jared. I mean, when you look at modern business, the fluidity of change means that you can't predict what's going to happen in a year. You can't really predict what your data is going to look like 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, and you have to be able to make those migrations, make those changes relatively quickly as your data changes, as your needs change, and as your departments change, and ultimately as your business changes.
Yep. And so I don't want to pigeonhole and say, well, this is all about documents, because it's actually not. It's data.
Oh yeah.
It's data. So I mean, a good classic example that really applies to almost everyone that we know. You have a separate HRIS system from SharePoint. And it's not connected to Active Directory. A lot of those HRIS systems out there today, getting the data out of it and then putting it into Active Directory, that's a whole different thing. So like, think about that onboarding process. What is it you're using? What maps that data and keeps it consistent? Every time there's a change in the HRIS system, how do I get that to reflect in my Active Directory or in SharePoint or in several lists that we're containing in SharePoint that have lists of employees and their features? How do we get all that to stay synchronized at the same time? And I think that's a word we haven't used yet, which is data is also synchronization of all these different pieces in these disparate systems. Yeah. So hopefully what we've done is expand your mind a little bit about what that actually is.
Stretch the mind.
Okay. Stretch them all out. All right. So what we wanted to do was take a couple of scenarios and talk about things that these are real world scenarios that we've had to go and conquer for our clients. So scenario number one is just regular file shares, and I'll let Zach take it over and kind of explain this scenario.
So I mean, Steen talked about it briefly with old traditional migrations. You pick up some file shares, you put it on the cloud, and then you have a file share in the cloud effectively.
Yeah, effectively.
And we said that's really not a viable way to handle migrations or handle your data. So you might say, okay, well, if we can't do that, then what do we do next? And there's some requirements we have to consider. So we need to make sure that we move all the files that are in the file shares. We're not just picking and choosing, right? We're taking all the data. We're making sure that the metadata is maintained. That's the created, modified date, who authored the document. And then On top of that, we want to maintain somewhat of a similar folder structure because your users know that folder structure. And usually a business has at least some logical structure to their file shares. And so we want to make sure that we have at least a very similar logical structure to the data wherever it ends up.
So I think that criteria number 2 there is actually important. When my document moves from the file share and ends up in SharePoint, I want the original author from when it was on the file share, the original modified date, or the original create date. I want all those from the file share version of that as it gets into SharePoint. I don't want a migration tool that is going to replace those with today's date and
Right.
the account that was used to migrate the data. I don't want that.
Right, and
Okay.
that is a continuous struggle when you start looking at traditional migration tools. You'll see some of that audit trail disappear. You'll see the versions disappear, things like that, because handling that piece is really hard, actually.
Yeah.
So the way that you should really start taking a basic file share migration, especially in the context of SharePoint, is you want to take those shares and you want to break them out. And you want to break them out into different sites for different departments, or whatever your root folders, your main level of logical structure is. And then you're going to want to take each of the subfolders and make those document libraries more often than not. And there is a lot of considerations you have to take into account here, and some of that is maybe even the nested folders you want to have be document sets, so you have metadata on the actual folder structure itself. Maybe you just need the documents themselves to have metadata on that. And then you have to consider things as well, like, are you going to reach the 5,000 item limit within SharePoint? Or if there's a limit on the amount of data that can be in certain areas of whatever data target that you're going to. And all of these things have to be considered and accounted for. So when you move your data, you're not just picking up everything as it is and then slopping it down wherever you're putting it. Once you move your shares, all of a sudden you've logically reorganized your data and started to make your data work for you and your business.
Yeah. So as a side note, I think this is an opportunity also for you to organize that data. So if your shared drives basically have bad document hygiene, now's that time to kind of look at that, clean it up, and get it organized as we get it into the new environment, and we'll make that as easy as possible.
Yes, I raised my hand because I need to say something here. So when you're working with your file shares, your huge file shares, and you got a huge amount of documents, you think you know what's in there, right? You think you know what's in there, but you don't, right? You get surprised what's in there, and people put it into different folders and different naming conventions and stuff like that. So you get educated as you go along. You know your data more than you've ever known your data once your migration has completed, right? There's a process there, right? And you just can't get everything right the first time. So that kind of relates to the initial thing that Jared presented. Migration is not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing thing, and you just have to make decisions along the way. So, okay, we're gonna just move this piece like it is, and then we later on gonna massage it, change it, apply metadata, apply content types and stuff like that, create document sets. It's a big thing, right? It's complicated, but it's really easy now. So there's a lot of things that you get to know and a lot of things you get educated on, and you have to acknowledge this is not a one-time thing. It's something you have to do over a long period of time, if not forever, basically. Like Jared said, business is changing.
Yeah. So cool. So just a couple of considerations.
Now I feel better.
So some considerations that you have to take into account for a situation like this, especially for traditional migration tools. You really need to consider content type assignments when you're moving to SharePoint, and your traditional migration tools might not fully support content types across the board, especially if you're considering how you need to dynamically move that data to different sites or different libraries.
Yeah, so if I could maybe throw this dart in there, I think. I don't want IT to think that this is an IT job. Yes, IT is doing the mechanics of it, right? Or you have a partner that's doing the mechanics of it, one or the other. But in order for you to be able to assign content types in there, you've got to have some conversations with the business. And so you need to have some department conversations to find out what type of content they actually have, what type of documents do they deal with on a daily basis. All of that's called governance. And if you know us, if you know one thing about us, one thing we're going to tell you in every episode is, hey, governance first, right? Get some of that stuff worked out so that IT is not making these decisions on their own. IT is making informed decisions and going by a plan that everyone else has.
Right, and so, along with content types, you need to make sure that you fulfill those content types with metadata. You need to have metadata attached to those, whether it's document sets or it's documents or it's just, regular data that's sitting in a list somewhere. You need to make sure that there's metadata on it. If there isn't, then you're going to struggle.
I'll raise my hand again, and I just want to reiterate that you get educated, right? You have no idea what's in there when you start your migration, but you will know at the end of the migration, and you just can't do that in the time frame that the migration was planned for.
Yeah.
So you just have to do stuff afterwards, and have to massage things like applying metadata and changing things. And one of the very, very important things that Jared mentioned is you don't want to ruin who was the last modified person of that document. You don't want to add a new version just because you decide that you need a different classification. You want to persist on that so that you can reclassify your stuff without losing the audit trail about the files. That's pretty damn important.
Yeah.
Right, yep. And
not a one-time thing.
And not a one-time thing, yeah, definitely. And so, the other thing you need to consider about traditional migration tools, and this is something that isn't really talked about a lot, but it's something that really needs to be talked about, is the fact that a lot of those traditional migration tools are about taking your data out of your environment, bringing it up to their cloud, and then moving it to whatever their destination is, which can be SharePoint Online or maybe even your on-prem SharePoint.
Yeah.
And that's data exfiltration at bare bones, and that isn't necessarily going to be very helpful from a security perspective.
That is true. So we are simply not saying that every migration tool out there is not safe. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you need to make that consideration. Data is moving from your environment to a cloud environment that you don't know anything about. You didn't write the code for that. So I can give you an assurance as a developer that, hey, this all works great and that we're sending it to a secure environment. Oh yeah, it's in Azure. So I'm telling you that Azure is secure as well, but it doesn't mean I wrote, you don't know what's going on in there. So you need to make that consideration and make that decision for yourself, okay?
Right.
And we just want you to know about it. You guys be the judge of that.
Right, and to reiterate a point that we've made several times now, which is, migrations, especially with traditional migration tools, you see it as a point A to point B style migration. You pick up what you have and you put it somewhere else. You don't do any cleanup, you don't do reorganization, you don't get to know your data like Steen was mentioning. And that's actually something we see a lot in our clients where we're like, okay, so you know your data, we don't know your data, right? And then, we start giving them, some reports on their data and they go, well, we didn't know that there was this much data here, or this folder structure over here we haven't used in 3 years, we didn't even realize it was there. So, I mean, you really should take this opportunity to go ahead and clean up your data, reorganize it, and use this migration as an excuse to know your data.
Yeah, but then again, you have to make intelligent decisions about what you're going to do in the time frame that you had available and what you're going to do later on the ongoing migration that you will experience in your life.
Yeah. Right. So for this particular solution, internally, we used Fusion. So the reason why we use Fusion is not really evident inside of here, because just to be honest and transparent and straightforward, there are many tools that can do this traditional pick it up and move it to another place type of migration, okay? But we chose Fusion, and we're going to let's go through a couple more scenarios and we'll start to see why our choice was Fusion for this one and possibly for some other ones as well. Cool. So here's another scenario that involves databases. We have two that involve databases. Yeah. So 2A and 2B. Go.
Yep. So the first one is a little more simple than 2B, but basically we need to be able to take data out of a SQL server, and we need to then, massage that data to create list items and, put it into SharePoint. And we need to make sure that we took the data that we were pulling out of a database and split it up into the correct list. We weren't just dumping it all in one location. And so, we start off with a connection right into the database, which is a Microsoft SQL server. And then we pulled that right into SharePoint. And you need to be able to take that data and split it out. In this scenario, we were taking the data which had to do with projects and plans that are associated with those projects, and we need to split them into 2 lists: a projects list and a plan list. And inside of those, I mean, you could have multiple plans that were associated with a single project, and so you definitely don't want all of that in one list. This was a scenario that was really interesting, and it's not something that is a one-time thing. This was actually a business process that's continuing today. It's been working for the last 3 years or so for one of our clients, and they depend on it daily to make sure that their data is up to date within SharePoint where they work, and at the same time, but they can't drop the third-party database that all this data is coming from.
Right. So third-party or line of business database that's being used for something else. Maybe it's feed from a website. Maybe it's a feed from just some other application, a CRM or something like that. And then we want to be able to surface some of that in SharePoint so that our workers inside of the SharePoint environment don't have to go interact with this other application, or that other application doesn't even do what we're about to do with the data now. It just collects it for a different reason. We're about to do something completely different with that data. So it could be many, many reasons, but we were able to tie those 2 things together. Okay,
Right.
And go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a quick note on that. It's concerning documents. Can I say that now?
Sure.
All right.
Go for it.
So tapping into data sources like SQL Server or Oracle or whatever data source you have, or for that matter, huge CSV files using filters and stuff, one of the sort of migration things that you do is to retrieve that information and then tag the documents so that you can have a document set for project A, project B, project C, and all the different properties from project A comes from the SQL, and it gets updated constantly, and that applies to those documents in that document set. So having that data and that information current makes the search that you do for your documents work on current data.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, that kind of segues us right into 2B. This is an example of the same client, same department, same process actually, that evolved over time and got bigger. And we basically went from just extracting data from the SQL Server, putting it into a couple of lists that are different based upon the metadata, and then actually added in having to maintain files associated with those projects and those plans, and then maintain that similar folder structure at the same time that existed over in their old share drives. And so, you can see this diagram as we're going through, and basically we had, the stuff we just talked about, the SQL Server to the SharePoint site in the 2 lists, the project list and the plan list. But then we also went ahead and created project sites that were dedicated to each project, and then those plans were actually associated as document sets inside of those project sites, and all of the files went right into those document sets.
Yeah, I was account director on this one. This saved them so much time internally.
Yeah, and so when we're looking at a scenario like this, some considerations we need to take, not just from a traditional migration tool standpoint, but in general, is that in order to do something like this is quite difficult. There's a lot of potential custom coding or scripting that needs to be done. There's a lot of functionality you have to be aware of, and there's a lot of pieces that have to match up. And pulling data out of a SQL Server and throwing it into a list or applying it as metadata to a bunch of files is quite a complex thing, and you're going to struggle to find products or solutions out there that can do that kind of thing. And if you do build a homegrown system, because technically you could do it through custom code, it's going to be very time consuming, it's going to be error prone, and it's going to be difficult to handle. And there's just a lot of considerations.
It's going to be a big black box.
Yep, it's a black box that's hard to deal with. For us internally, we chose Fusion again for this solution because it had the capability to pull that data natively from SQL. It could apply the metadata where we wanted it to be applied, and create those items inside of SharePoint the way we wanted them to be created.
Yeah, so we actually hunted for, because we have different clients who need different things and they have different circumstances as well, we actually hunted for the migration tool that we wanted to use for this specific project to do these specific things. So we looked at some of the others out there. We looked at ShareGate, we looked at Metalogix, AvePoint, which I believe is actually one of the other ones, and a few others. And certainly those are excellent companies. If you go to some like SharePoint shows and things like that, you'll see them all with the big tents. Very, very cool people that work there. But what we were looking for was just something that no one else had actually thought of. And I should say that our name is Spindustry.
Yes.
And what that actually translates to in Latin is we break people's stuff. We find scenarios that people just actually haven't thought of and don't know how to handle. And so we approach them as that can be done, and we will figure out how to get it done. And so in that process, you know, we end up talking to the manufacturers directly and finding out what's the limit, where's the line drawn on what you can do, what can you have in there by tomorrow for us. And out of that conversation, for this scenario and for the scenario we're going to talk about next, I believe, we just couldn't find another solution that could do all the pieces of the puzzle for us. And so that's one of the main reasons that we actually ended up going with Fusion for this one.
Right, and really one of the major things that we, you know, tried to identify whether or not other products had, and we, for the next couple scenarios as well, which was data synchronization, right? Like being able to synchronize that data while the migration's going on, because it takes more time. We need to be able to maintain that data integrity as we go through.
Yes. So we'll probably talk about that in just a few minutes as well. So.
Right. So the third scenario here is a document image management solution that a client of ours had. It's a very common scenario. You have a big document management solution out there. And so what happened, you know, in this situation, the client wanted to move away from that document management solution and wanted to put all those documents into SharePoint. And we're like, great, that's awesome.
So I'm gonna interject there and just say why. Why would they want to do that?
Well, there's definitely a cost reason to do that. I mean, so you already have SharePoint, and there's these document management solutions are really quite expensive.
They're expensive. I mean, some of them have price tags of like $250,000. This particular client was paying over like more than $5,000 a month for what they were storing, and the more data you had in there, the more you actually paid for it. And it was not even in a cloud solution. It wasn't even a cloud-based solution. So that was incredible. And so what they immediately saw as return of investment here was they recovered that $5,000 a month plus and could use that for something else now.
Right.
You know, which is just awesome, because what they needed to happen with the documents, SharePoint does all of those things.
So basically you migrated a custom document management system to SharePoint.
That's pretty much what we did. So go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, so I mean, we had some really unique requirements though, because what we found was when we got the data dump from that other application, we found out that every single scanned file was split into individual pages, and each of those pages was a TIFF file. It was an image file that existed on their system, and then all of their metadata existed in some other database that they dumped everything to a single text file. And we needed to be able to take all of those TIFF files and merge them together so that all the pages of a single document was a single document.
So basically, if the original document had been 3 pages and they scanned it, it ended up being 3 individual TIFFs. We needed to then come back and put that back together as a PDF.
Yeah,
so that
right.
One PDF had three
right.
pages inside.
So we had to convert, merge them together and then convert them to PDF. And then we needed to move that data, those newfound documents, the cobbled together documents, and we needed to put them in their resting place inside of SharePoint and assign metadata from that flat text file that we got to all of those newly created full-fledged PDF documents. And so, it was effectively taking, files from a file share, merging them together, and then we had to use, in our case, we used Fusion's built-in PDF conversion functionality to in-stream, as they were being pushed to their destination, be converted to PDFs. And that was broken out into multiple sites and multiple libraries within the sites. It was a very complex job to handle.
So I feel like one of the things we should have had in this webinar was a little soundtrack that went, ooh,
Yeah.
because that is actually amazing. Well, so the words you used there was, it did the transformation in stream. As we said, hey, move this file over there, and as it was moving it, modified it to be a PDF and then put it in the new destination. That's insane.
Yeah,
That's
and then applied the metadata that was meant for a bunch of different files, you know, that were listed out individually, and put it onto the respective documents where needed. It was an incredible big win for us. I mean, we thought it was really cool when we figured out how to do it, and we honestly, again, this was a situation where we looked around, we talked to people, we went and talked to all of, you know, a whole bunch of other traditional migration tools and other migration tools and some of the newer ones too, and we struggled to find anyone who could pull you know, metadata from a CSV or a text file, flat text file like that, and apply it to documents. We struggled to find people that had real solid integration with any form of PDF conversion mechanism. And there was definitely no flexibility in their products to implement any form of TIFF merging or, you know, image magic or what have you. And that was, it was a really hard stopping point for us, because I mean, it was beginning to look like nothing could do this. And
so we were going to have multiple tools doing this, and we didn't understand or could not wrap our heads around the consistency of each one of those things. So for example, yes, there's a tool here that could convert something to PDF. Could it handle the million records we were going to send through it? And would it be throttled, or would it be, you know, what was it going to become this blocking point for the entire thing?
Right.
What does it do when there's an error with it? Does it show us what the error is, or does it just continue on and we never know? Because a million records we cannot go and manually or visually review. We have to have high confidence level that this is going to do exactly what we wanted it to do. And so there was a lot of aspects that we had to look at in this whole process. And so we ended up using Fusion for this.
Yep. And Fusion provided us all of the things that we needed. We had the flexibility to integrate with other products like ImageMagick to do the merging. We were able to do the PDF conversion in stream, which was a huge piece for us. That was really cool to see that was there. And I mean, there's native compatibility with pulling metadata and data in general out of text files and CSV files. So that was just another step that we built inside of Fusion to go ahead and apply that data to the newfound documents. And basically, we needed a solution that extended beyond just moving the documents. And it was a scenario that was quite complex. We had to be very careful about what we were doing with the data, because you don't want to damage it in the process. And so we had to really take considerations on every step that we took, and we literally found no other solution than what Fusion was able to provide us.
Awesome. So we have one more scenario, I believe.
Yes.
Is that correct? So let's get through this, and then we'll probably have some time for some questions as well. So start gearing your questions up, get them over to Brittany, and she's going to throw them at us, and we're going to see if we can hit them out of the park.
Right. So in our fourth scenario, we have another document management solution. This one's a little different though. This was a homegrown.
Oh yeah.
This was a great one. So is a homegrown document management solution, and you know, it was something that's been around in that client's company for a very, very long time, and we needed to be able to move the files from their flat file shares, which is how it was organized, into SharePoint, into their respective libraries and sites. But we needed to pull the metadata from XML documents.
Yeah.
And these XML documents, it wasn't just one XML document that had the metadata for everything in the share. It was each document had its own XML document with its own set of metadata inside of it. And it wasn't all consistent. It was almost like they had created a system that applied, at least somewhat transparently, content types to the file shares.
Yeah.
And it was an incredibly complex job that we had to really kind of change the way we looked at pulling that metadata in. And at the same time, we needed to make sure that all of the integrity of both the metadata and the files were maintained.
And to be clear, we're talking about XML files, not Excel files, okay? because there's a lot of companies that can work with an Excel file. And when we initially called, I think the people thought we were talking about Excel files, and they're like, yeah, we can do that. And we were like, we were like, hey, show that to us. And they were like, no, we can't. So it was XML that was the very important thing.
Yeah, and we, you know,
even though if it was Excel files, one Excel file that describes the metadata for each file, that would be incredibly complex as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And when you start talking about 1 million files, I mean, that starts looking like a really hard job, if not impossible job, depending on what tools you have available. This was made even more complex by the fact that this entire migration was handled over about 6-7 months, and throughout that entire time, the client was actually working in the file shares and in the new environment and doing testing in the new environment. So we actually had to keep that data synchronized continuously.
So even after the testing was done, we went into kind of a beta mode where we didn't switch all of the consumers for that old environment. We didn't switch all of them to the new environment. We switched partial. So we had maybe 2 divisions, if you will, come on. And so we had to keep, we did not want the administrators to have to go and add a file into the old system and add that file into SharePoint as well. We wanted them to continue to work from their old admin, add documents in, and we would grab those, move those over into it on a daily job or less, maybe multiple times a day, I'm not sure what it was. We'd move that over into SharePoint and keep it synchronized for them. And then if we did not have to do reverse synchronization, where if they made the change in SharePoint, we would send it back over to the other system. But the thing is, we could have if we needed to. That's how awesome it was.
Right.
So go ahead.
And all of that was facilitated by, again, Fusion. I mean, we looked around, we tried to see what other people could do. And I mean, literally every vendor we talked to, we'd start talking to and we'd say, oh, we can move files. Yep. And as soon as we said, okay, can you pull data out of an XML file?
And I'll just say that
or from any data source, basically.
Yeah.
The client's preference here was to go with another vendor. It was ShareGate. They wanted to go with ShareGate here, and so we were like, yeah, okay, we like to please our clients. Let's go with ShareGate. And as we started investigating, we came to the conclusion that it could not work, and we had phone calls with ShareGate. The timing was right, so I even went to a conference and talked to them there, and it just couldn't be done. And they were shaking their head, thinking, we haven't even thought about that. You know what I mean? There's not something that we even have on a plan to put inside of here. And that's not to say that ShareGate isn't awesome, because like I told you before, I like the people from ShareGate, I like the people from AppPoint and from MetaLogic. I like all of those people. There's some really nice, great people. But in this scenario, I like Steen also.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, I'm just going to interrupt there, because there's a very, very big difference, and it's very, very, and then the F word, clear, between what is forklifting, right? What is forklifting and what is actual real world re-architecting and migration of your content and your data.
Yep.
It's a very, very clear distinction.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. I just want to make that clear. I'm not saying anything bad about anybody, but if you aim for forklifting, well, fine, do that. But if you have anything else than that, well, you're in trouble.
So I'm gonna kind of just say that a different way and kind of mention what I was talking about before. Why is it, what did we choose for each one of these particular scenarios? So you might have noticed that we said we use Fusion for each one of those. And so the reason is not because another solution couldn't do some of those things. It's that we gave you 4, really 5 completely different scenarios for data migration or moving data or changing the state of data. We gave you 4 or 5 completely different scenarios. The only tool we could find that really met all of those needs for every single one of those and actually did it well for us was Fusion. And that's the reason we truly use this specific product. So
Right. And so I mean, where you hit it right on the head there, Jared, because when we look at migrating the client's data, we don't look at it as picking it up the way it is and putting it somewhere else. To us, we really do believe that you should take the opportunity to get to know your data, reorganize it, clean it up, and make it so that your data is working for you in its new environment rather than you working to make it work. And like you said, there's nothing wrong with the traditional migration tools that are out there. They do a really good job at picking up what you have and moving it. And if that's exactly what you need at the moment or looking for, then that is a great solution for you. But there are considerations and limitations with that we've talked about here. And we've talked about how they typically only move files. They might have some metadata associations or content types that they can apply to it, but it's relatively limited. And they oftentimes aren't able to pull from external data sources, whether that's SQL or an XML file or flat file or what have you. And they don't have the flexibility for synchronization that Fusion does. And that was those things are what made us choose Fusion, not just because we love Fusion, but because what we needed to accomplish with it, with this tool, whatever migration tool we used, needed to be much more flexible and complex than what a traditional tool would have provided us.
Yeah. So having said all that, have you guys getting some questions ready? We're just going to kind of just review, and I want to add a couple of things into our conversation that aren't in some of the slides that we just had. So I mentioned earlier that I went to Ignite, and I don't say that because Zach didn't get to go to Ignite. I just say that because I went to Ignite.
Sure.
And so one of the big topics there, and again, if your business is not into what I'm getting ready to say, then you probably might be left behind at some point in time, because machine learning, AI, bots, all these beautiful keywords that people are throwing out, that is the future. That is what's coming down the road. And migration is today's migration or future today's migration. Those things are going to be needed for that realm as well. I mean, getting that data in the place where it can then be analyzed, getting into the, merging data from different places to get it analyzed. Yes, it's got to be smart enough to be able to go through your entire environment and do certain things, but it's likely that you're going to want to organize some of that data first, so that it can be meaningfully consumed and then used by AI, predictive algorithms, and all those really beautiful words that mean future stuff. All the stuff you've seen on, Star Trek, that's all coming.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we mentioned it earlier, that data and businesses change so rapidly nowadays. And when you start including some of these new advanced technologies, I mean, it's going to only get faster. I mean, if you consider what business looked like 5 years ago versus what it looks like today, or even 3 years ago, you can see that change is speeding up continuously. And so that migration process is going to need to be continuous throughout your business, regardless of what time it is.
Awesome.
So yeah, I mean, let's go ahead and take a look at that job, Jared, that you kicked off earlier. So,
all right. So here's Fusion again, or this is an example of Fusion. It just it had some steps inside of there. You guys want to talk about this if you can?
We won't go too deep into the weeds.
Yeah, we won't get too deep in the weeds here. We just want to keep it light. So again, there was a set of metadata that we were going to use for certain things. Okay, I believe for the resulting document sets. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, awesome. And we had this SharePoint site that was empty before, and ta-da! There's now, what are these inside of here?
These are document sets.
Okay, and we can tell that by how?
The little icon there.
Cute little icon. So it was a modification that was done this year so that document sets actually showed up as document sets and not as folders.
Yep. And if you select one of those document sets.
I will select one. Oh, wait, sorry, my bad.
No, you're fine.
Okay, well, I'm inside of it now. So inside of it, they've moved some data inside of it.
Yep. And if you look over at the side there, since you don't have anything selected, it's actually showing you the data from the metadata text file there that we added to the document set.
So there's one right there for biofuel alternatives, and there's a date that goes along with it.
Yep.
Right? And so that came over here, and you have metadata inside of there now. It's pretty cool. Associated to the documents, how about associated to the document set itself?
That's associated to the document set.
Yep.
Cool.
And so it flows down to the
document set, pushes it down.
Yep.
Yes.
That's right.
So to be honest with you, we could give you this huge lesson on document sets and how awesome they are.
I love it.
But that's probably a different, that's an hour in itself of us just going through and talking about it, but it's really cool. But here's the document set itself. So I'm at the document set level, and you see that same information is here associated to it. And by nature, a document set will take that information, if you set it up correctly, and push it down to the documents that are inside of it as well. So it pins all in there. So that's pretty cool stuff. So we did some easy data migration that took literally zero amount of seconds probably to do. But we wanted to show you that there are things that are possible. Every scenario that we've shown you is possible. And what we hope to do out of all of this is really just increase the size of your brain space that's thinking about migration and thinking, oh, I can actually get that done. Oh, that problem that we're sitting here looking at that we can actually get that done. That's possible for us to do. and it can be done inside of SharePoint or any of the other environments, and it can be done with different tools. And then there's Fusion if you want to use that for it as well. So,
right, and I mean, just to
I'll
add
let
to
you guys
that,
finish up while I go ahead and put this question slide.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, just to add to that, what you said there, Jared, I mean, we really want you to consider, you know, your data and consider where you want it to be. And, you know, whether that's with us or someone else, we want you to look at that data and figure out what help you need to get to, you know, that state in the future. And I mean, we are absolutely happy to help out with that. We've done it for a lot of our clients, and it's something that we preach quite regularly. And typically we do utilize Fusion for something like that, because we do have the flexibility to reorganize the data and dynamically put that data where it needs to go with the metadata it needs.
Yeah. So I'm going to turn it over to Brittany. She has a couple of questions.
Yep, so I do have 3 great questions here. Really quickly, Jerry, will you go to the next slide for me? I have 3 great questions, but no one's specifically asking about their own company, and everybody obviously listening is going to be trying to apply this back to your own scenario. If you're listening to this later on a recording, you can ignore me just for a minute, but this week, in 2 days on Thursday, Steen will still be here for the week, and we have a free event here at Spindustry that anyone is welcome to come, and it's from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock here on...
I'm here all day.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that next. Yeah, so this specific event, we will talk about your own specific scenarios, demo it, and actually be in Fusion for the 2 hours. We will provide a light lunch, and then also Steen is also giving anybody that comes a free 3-month full Fusion server license if you'd like to try it out or use it for 3 months.
Yeah,
Full-fledged product.
So we haven't, and I'm just going to throw in, we haven't really talked about Fusion and what all it is. We've just told you that we've used it for certain scenarios. If that interests you and you think, gosh, I'd like to hear more about Fusion, that's what this event's more about, to see some really cool things that Fusion can do, to get down into the weeds and really just go through how much power it has and things like that. We try to keep this webinar, you know, at a different level, so we don't want to dig down in the weeds here. So
Right.
That's what we're doing.
And I just want to say, if you can't come on Thursday, let me know. Maybe we can remote you into that. Also, Steen is available pretty much all day tomorrow for if you want to talk to him about specific conversations. It's freezing out. We can bring you a coffee tomorrow if you're around Des Moines. Otherwise, we can give you a call and talk to you a little bit more. All right, you can go back to the questions now. Just want to make sure people knew that was an option. All right, so first question. Can I apply a content type post migration? So you've done your migration. Can you go and apply content type later?
Wow, that's a good question.
So I'm going to split that out into 2 questions. So my one question would be, we did our migration 2 months ago, and we didn't know about any of this cool stuff, and we didn't know about best practices, and we didn't do governance ahead of time. But now we've been through some of that, and I realize I should have content types on all these things. Can a migration help me get there? Can I apply to those content types after the fact? And then second would be, hey, if I'm getting ready to do a migration now, do I have to do it all at the one point in time, or can I move the data, or what do you guys been calling it? Forklift it? Yeah. Can I forklift it first and then come back with a second pass on it and put in content types?
Yeah, I mean, you can.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, you can do both situations, right? I mean, both situations are doable. Fusion does an excellent job in both of them, actually. You can add those content types after the fact, regardless of which situation you're in. That being said, I mean, one thing that we at Spindustry regularly preach is that, you know, if you're going to do a migration, and you've heard it throughout this webinar, you know, you should consider these things in line with that migration, right? You're going to, you know, if you're going to move your data, you might as well move it once.
Yeah, but I have a comment on that, because in the time frame given, you typically, you know, you find yourself, wow, we didn't know all this. We have to deal with all that. So you have to do that, like you said, in the second pass.
Right, and that's where our statement of migration is, you know, taking data from one state to another state really applies there, because we are you're going to take the data you already have, and you're going to just apply content types and give that, you know, associated metadata from the content types to those documents at that point. We're not actually, you know, lifting up and moving those documents somewhere else. We're just giving those documents more rich data.
I just need to say this, because this is an excellent example of that you can massage your data, you can change your mind or you can adapt to the business that's changing, and you can apply those content types, apply that metadata as you go along, and you can do that without losing the current version and without losing the audit trail of who created the document and who modified the document.
Right.
Not some system account that then, okay, we're going to change our minds now, the business changes, so we're applying this and that, and then we lose everybody's timestamp and we get a stupid new version,
Yeah,
right? And that's really important.
Yep, good stuff. All right, back to Brittany.
All right, next question. We have data at 6 different locations. What are the considerations of moving documents from multiple locations into one location?
So if you have it in 6 locations, you can't do anything. If you have it in 7 locations, you can do something about it.
That's right.
So someone has all these multiple locations of information. What now? You know, what are some things that we need to be concerned about as they're moving those around? Because there's a lot of possibilities there. I have one document that's the true source of information, but I need to get it to those 6 locations.
Yes.
You know, so that each of them has it. Maybe they're plants, and if they go offline or lose internet connection or something like that, but still have a network, or maybe it's if they are remote located and they're trying to cover a scenario where they have all their emergency documents available on a shared drive. Okay, if the power gets, or not the power, but if the internet or the network goes down, they can still go to a computer and get those emergency guidelines off of that computer because it'll be there in a drive, right? So, or in a share or in a folder. So there's that, you know, I've got this one document I'm trying to replicate, if you will, to different places. But then there's the other scenario. They're creating documents in all these other locations, and then we're trying to feed that back to one source to make sure that the current change from everywhere is updated in one central location. Not to mention just I've got data in a whole bunch of different places I need to contain it all.
Right. You know, I mean, that's the easiest one I would say, is where you just have data at multiple locations and you want to bring it all together into one location for the one true source of information. Regardless though, which of those scenarios you go with, you really need to consider things like, do you potentially have duplicates of data? You know, if you do have duplicates, which one's the real one? Or do you need those duplicates? And you also need to consider things like, you know, if you are needing to push files to, you know, the external locations or whatever, how are you doing that? What's your reliability on that?
How much bandwidth is it taking?
Yeah, how much bandwidth?
How much bandwidth does that remote location have?
Yeah, and how often is it happening? How quickly does that stuff need to be updated? Because if you know, if it was, say, a remote hospital or something, and it was getting an updated patient list every 15 minutes,
or a procedure
or something like that, you don't want that to go down. And when you start considering what your data's doing there, or why it's being moved there, you really need to start, you might have to reconsider the entire prospect of doing that, depending on what that data is doing.
So, and I could give you,
so you get educated, basically.
I'll give you a new tech way to do that as well. And this, I mean, obviously this is not a inexpensive way to do it, but for most of you, or for a lot of our clients, this is within the realm of something they should be able to do and something they may need to do. So when you have that remote location that really has possibly unstable connections, or is just out in some place like, a country that just doesn't have all these things, is it possible to put some type of server there that duplicates what Azure does in the cloud? Okay, and so that solution is called an edge server. It's built off of the Azure stack, which would give you all the same things that Azure in the cloud has, but it's in an actual location where you are. So with that, you can then span out your global footprint. So I can be at the corporate office and say, okay, we've got certain things that belong in the cloud, but I have certain things that need to go down to this Azure Edge server whenever it's online. And boom, you can coordinate and do a lot of really interesting scenarios now with some of the new tech that's coming out. So if you have a scenario like that, and I'm not sure if anybody actually does, but if you have scenarios like that, start looking into some of the Azure stack, Azure Edge servers, and Azure Arc's another keyword that's out there. Look into some of those types of things as well.
All right, we have 1 minute left. So last question, you have 30 seconds to answer.
Okay.
Okay,
Speed round.
speed round. And this is a topic that I know you guys are very passionate about. So
Oh,
Oh, no.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
can I convert libraries to doc sets? And before you
Oh.
go, if anyone's interested in this, please give us a call. We are happy to talk to you about this for free over the phone, but 30 seconds.
One word answers.
No.
Zach says no.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
we have
okay.
a yes, and Jared's gonna say maybe. Just-
Yeah, so quick 30-second answer here. Converting libraries to document sets isn't really something that would be supported. However, converting folders within those libraries to document
Oh, yeah,
sets is
yeah.
absolutely supported and something that can be
That's
done.
fair answer, yeah.
Yeah.
Good answer from Zach. Zach's the winner. You get the
Yeah.
prize.
Yeah. Do I get to go to Ignite next year?
But yes, please let us know if you want more information about that. I know Steen would love to talk to you.
Oh, yeah.
So keep in mind this, we can, always get Steen on a phone, but he is here locally with
Yes.
us for the week. So
Yes.
if you are interested in us coming by or having a conversation with us, please let us know. I know I have a couple of you guys on today that we will be seeing on Thursday. So we will see you there. We'll have some pizza and food and drinks for everybody.
And I will stretch your mind.
Yes, and here's my information on the screen. Please email me, call me with any questions that you have. Like I said, you will be receiving a recording and a slide deck from me shortly, and we hope to see you all at our next webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.